right, another week of season 2 of the Game Dev Show. Kaley Hurst and Luke Greenaway here. We are back this week with Mike Fridley. Hilarious guest, Mike Fridley.
Yeah, what a guest. I think with Mike is obviously you'd expect him to be funny because he works for Squanch, and obviously the co-creator is Justin Roiland, one of the co-creators of Rick and Morty. So he's just incredibly entertaining, but actually there's like an underlayer of seriousness behind what they do in terms of how they approach their roles and their work, and they have a very clear mission statement. And it's a very challenging concept, obviously, to overcome humor within games. It was fantastic talking to him about that. But yeah, he's just so entertaining. Great.
He's also just been in the industry for a really long time. And in a wide variety of roles, types of company, like size of company. So he had really interesting experience to share. So I say we get into it.
Let's get into it.
So Mike, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us where you grew up, what you were like as a kid, and where you got interested in games, how you got interested in games?
Sure. So I grew up in Northern Virginia on the East Coast of the U.S., about 20 miles south of Washington, D.C., in what was a little town called Woodbridge at the time, but now it's massive. But it was a smaller town. Nobody famous has come from there, so nobody knows it. Grew up there, spent most of my childhood in Northern Virginia, moved to Baltimore after I finished college, and met my girlfriend at the time, wife now. I was going to the movies with her, and I worked a bunch of weird jobs after college, but it was nothing that had struck me as what I wanted to do with my life. And I was an American history major, which is a horrible major if you want to actually be employed as anything other than a teacher or like a historian, I guess. I don't know what the hell else you do with it. So we were at the movies, and they had the slideshow of stuff going on before the previews, and the slide came up and says, "Do you want to play games for a living?" I was like, "Yes, I do." It's like, "Give us a call at blah, blah, blah." And it was absolute quality, this outsourced QA house in Hunt Valley, Maryland, which was pretty close to where we lived in Baltimore. And I called them. I came in and proved that I could change my desktop resolution and know how to boot up a computer. And they're like, "You got the job." And they were largely a outsourced QA house for Hasbro and Microprose. So they did Microprose and Hasbro work. My first game I ever worked on was Clifford the Big Red Dog, followed by a massive follow-up of a My Little Pony game back before it was nice to be associated with that in any way. But then I became a lead there, and my first game was Risk 2 for Hasbro. So I worked in QA for a bit. AQ started to move more towards customer support and tech support calls, and less away from the functionality testing. There wasn't a lot of publishers or developers that were looking for a ton of outsourced QA. And I had a friend that went to Bethesda, and he said, "Hey, they're looking for a designer here at Bethesda, and I think you'd be great." So I applied, went to Bethesda, and they're like, I interviewed for the designer. And then during the interview for the designer, they're like, "We're also interviewing for an associate producer. Do you want to interview for that too?" And I said, "Okay." I was like, might as well take two shots. And I interviewed for the producer job. They got back to me a couple of months later and were like, "Well, we like you for both of them. Which one do you want?" I said, "Well, I like telling people what to do, and I like planning stuff. I don't think I'm a very good designer, even though you guys want to hire me as that." So, and then plus my buddy, Brian Chapin, who is still at Bethesda, had applied for the designer position. And I was like, "Well, I kind of want Chappie to work here too, so I'll take the producer job." So I came on as an AP at Bethesda, and the first game I started on was Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. So Morrowind is where we jumped in, and it was incredible to see it at Bethesda at that stage. Bethesda was still real small. They were living hand to mouth pretty much. Like, we have been building out the basement for like a cube, like a 3/4 cube wall type of, it was just a build out with conference rooms and everything. Like, they had some money, they wanted to renovate the dev space. And we ran out of money and stopped building the space. Like, we were all huddled together in a warehouse finishing Morrowind. There was even points at which we shrink wrapped some of the games to get them out, the physical copies of the games, so we wouldn't have to pay for the overhead on that. So from those humble beginnings at Bethesda, kind of it is what it is now, or I guess they just got bought for a gazillion dollars and have done well for themselves there.
You would never imagine that. Like from Morrowind, playing Morrowind, you would never imagine.
Yeah, it was crazy. And Bethesda before that, like they didn't have any QA at all. And I came in as an associate producer, and I'm like, okay, and I'd been working in QA for a couple of years. I'm like, how do you guys, test? How do you do functionality testing? Like, well, we don't have QA. Okay, so how do you test? Well, the developers, when they're not doing anything, they play the game and report bugs. I'm like, oh my God, no wonder that it was Bugthesda forever. Every game they made was just terribly buggy. So. But, by the time I left there, we had built an internal QA department, and they're really robust testing now. And they've branched out into MMOs, obviously, and they have a ton of QA. But at the time, they had zero QA. I wrote, I think, 10,000 bugs for Morrowind.
Jeez.
In the time I was there. It was just over 10,000 bugs that I'd entered into the database for Morrowind. And it still wasn't like super solid. Like it still had a bunch of bugs when we shipped it, but it was just a little bit better than the previous Daggerfall.
So this is like a funny bit of overlap because Luke and I are at PTW, like in our non-podcast hours, which Absolute Quality was acquired by E4E. E4E was acquired by PTW. Our current CFO is from the Absolute Quality days. So we have a bit of shared history there. But I'm curious, there's so many different ways into the industry. Do you think starting in QA, what do you think about that as a way to get into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your discipline is. Like, I think, back in the late 90s when I was getting into development, QA was a more viable path because we didn't have colleges that existed that gave game development courses, and you couldn't study specific game, specifically a major in game design, or you couldn't take specific coding classes about games and AI and stuff like that. And Full Sail didn't exist, and all of the different specialized schools didn't exist. So it was pretty much the Wild West. And if you knew someone, it was the easiest way to get in. And if you worked in QA, you got to know a lot of people. So that was a good route in for folks that hadn't been established before. It still is a benefit to work in QA. It's more of a benefit, I think, to get hired on at a studio rather than work in a third-party QA house. So if you're if you're a designer or an artist or something and you want to get in, but you don't have the experience the studio is looking for, you likely can get hired as a tester or like an entry-level tester because you do have experience, you have schooling, and you understand how games are made. So when you get into the studio, you can kind of leverage that into, I'm going to meet with the designers and talk to these guys and see what, how I improve and show them my stuff and kind of build that word of mouth activision, like evangelists among the team. So the next time it does open up a spot, you're a shoe-in because you're a known quantity at that point. So it's not as open a gate as it used to be, but it's still, I think, a good inroad in. Like we're using design interns as QA over the summer at Squanch. So it's folks that have our design director, our studio design director teaches a class here in California on game design, and he had 2 outstanding students and they want to get into games. And I said, well, let's bring them on for the summer and get them some experience about how games are made. And there's no better place to learn that than QA. So it still exists, and I think it's still a good route.
Luke is former QA as well.
I used to work at Sega for a couple of years. Yeah, Crunch. I remember Crunch. I've said this before, I think, on the podcast back about 25 episodes ago. But
that's your one claim to fame.
I remember doing a 22-hour QA Crunch shift on Sonic Racing, like the go-kart game. I remember we were like 3 a.m. and they were just giving us sugar. Like it was almost like a drip. Like, keep going, guys.
Bethesda, we had locker rooms, showers, and cots. And we had a full kitchen, caffeine on tap, and we had a cook staff that would make meals all day. So it was like you just never had to leave, and you basically had to stay. Like we were sleeping under desks and it was horrible. But, you know, it's what you had to do to get going at that time. And it's funny to hear, you know, I always feel like the old man in game development now, because people will talk about like, oh, I had to work Saturday. This crunch was horrible. I had to work 10 hours. Like, yeah,
you're like, you think that's bad? I used to have to walk to work.
I wore the same underwear for a week.
That's great.
So, a little too revealing there, maybe.
No, that's great.
Mine was hypothetical. Yours was actual.
Yes.
That would definitely be the quote we use when we mark this
that'll
episode.
Be the
and Squanch, at Squanch, I'm definitely fine with that. It will be tame in comparison. So
tell us then about the path from Bethesda, where you did sometimes have to wear the same underwear 4 days in a row, to COO of Squanch. How did that come about?
It's a long, boring story probably, but like I could
give us the TLDR.
So the TLDR is that I left Bethesda for reasons that I probably shouldn't get into because they're very litigious, and went to work with some buddies that had left Bethesda to build another big open world RPG, because I'm stupid and I like building big open world RPGs because they're next to MMOs, they're the dumbest thing that you can build in the industry. That studio was crazy. Like Big Huge Games was great. It's kind of what I compare every place that I've worked at since to, and what I want to get to as kind of the culture and feel of how we make games and how we had kind of buy-in from the entire team. But they went through a lot of rocky roads. Like they were originally being published by THQ, then they were bought by THQ. Then THQ lost all of its money and went out of business and sold us to Kurt Schilling, the 38 Studios guy. And Kurt's a freaking mess. Like he never should have like been in charge of anything. He torpedoed the MMO studio that he had started in Rhode Island and kind of drug us down with it. But we shipped Reckoning before he could drag us down. It was funny. We were just doing a design review of systems, and somebody was doing a playthrough of Reckoning to show some of the systems that we had built in there, and it's still relevant. We built Reckoning after, you know, multiple years and hardships, and it kind of like, I'm still friends with everybody on that team. Like we still have a Facebook group. It's been a dozen years. A lot of folks have gone on and done great things, like lead designers from Mass Effect and Squadrons, and there's just been a bunch of success out of that team because they were all just really good folks and super talented. Big Huge has spun back up. The original founders have started it back up, and they're a mobile studio now, and they're doing a lot of cool stuff there. So, you know, after Big Huge went under, Mike Capps at Epic was a big fan. He loved Reckoning. He loved what we were doing. He played some D&D with a couple of us kind of like outside the industry, just because we all like playing D&D and knew each other. And he was a big fan. So he's like, hey, how about you guys spin up a small offshoot of Big Huge and build this game that came out of a game jam here at Epic? And we're like, cool. So we spun up Epic Baltimore. It was called Impossible Studios. It was alive for about a year. Mike retired. He had a baby, retired. Cliff moved on to do his own thing. So they were like two of our biggest advocates at Epic, and they disappeared. And Epic was looking to pull back and get out of, you know, developing outside of their core engine and their core games they had. I mean, they sold the Gears franchise. We're all aware of kind of their pullback there. And the funny thing was they had two games that they wanted to make at the same time that had come out of a game jam. One was the game we were working on, which was kind of a Diablo clone built in the Infinity Blade universe, kind of a top-down game. And the other one was Fortnite. And so I met Tanya Watson. She was the executive producer on Fortnite at the same time that I was down there. We spent a couple weeks on site in Raleigh, getting to know everybody and kind of getting our feet under us to build the studio in Baltimore. And that's how I met Tanya. So after that's key to the rest of the story, how I landed at Squanch. And it just, you know, illustrates how small the industry is. So after that place got shut down, I was like, man, I'm tired of doing good work and putting good people out there and situations happening that I can't control and having to shut places down. It's kind of hard on you after a while. So I was like, well, I'm going to go somewhere that I'm sure that's never going to happen to. So I went to EA Sports. They're going to ship Madden till the sun goes dark, probably. So I was like, that's a safe bet. So I will go there. My daughter was just starting college. I was like, man, I can pay off for college with the annual bonus plan of Madden. Like, this is going to be great. So we moved to Florida, went to work at EA Sports, and that's when I realized that it didn't matter. I thought, as a producer, it doesn't matter what game I'm working on. It's all content roadmaps. It's all risk assessment. It's staffing plans. It's all the same thing. It doesn't matter if I like the game I'm working on or not. And it turns out it does for me. It does matter if I like the game I'm working on. And I'm not a big sports guy. Like, obviously sports games do well. I'm just not a big sports game guy. And after a little over 4 years there, one of the guys from Big Huge reached out and said, hey, we're out here in Boulder. We're doing well. Hasbro's looking to acquire us, and we need a VP of production to get our production process stood up. So I made the move to Boulder. Left EA, went to Boulder at another small studio that was struggling, and because I don't learn my lesson, and had a great couple years there until Hasbro decided to sell it. They actually are reformed now as Scopely. As a Scopely studio in Boulder. And I had the opportunity to stay there and become the studio GM, but I don't want to speak ill of Scopely too much, but they just don't make games that I think are good. And I don't think that they make games that are good for the industry. And I think that they're a horrible organization. I started that off by saying I don't want to speak ill of Scopely, but
all of the views expressed on this podcast are. We'll do the legal disclaimer at the end.
They're going to come after me. They're going to find out. I do actually play their Marvel Strike Force, so please don't delete my account. I've been playing it for over 1,000 days, so please don't delete my account.
That escalates so quickly.
Yeah, that escalated. That's how
it did escalate quickly.
No, I don't think that they're horrible people or anything. It's just they slot machine games. Mobile games, it's not what I got in the industry to make. The kind of the random number generators that are built around how we monetize rather than how we have fun just aren't that appealing to me. But I did mobile to say I did mobile, and now I understand what mobile's about. I could take some of those learnings from mobile and apply them to indie and other platforms. So it was a good experience. It ended like it seems to be most of the stuff I touch. Everything I touch dies eventually, I guess. But while Hasbro was shut down, they were really, really, really nice with their severance. They're really good to all the people at Backflip. It gave me some kind of room to breathe and figure out what I wanted to do and what made sense for me in the future. And I really got to the point where I was like, man, I just miss making games that I want to play. I'd gone from producer to senior producer to executive producer to development director to VP of production. And I'm like, I miss being on the game itself, working with the team, boots on the ground, understanding what game we're working on, the minutia of it. So I saw this opening at Squanch for an executive producer. I'm like, well, it's a little bit of a step down, but this will get me back into making games. And I love Justin's stuff, and I love the kind of the attitude of Squanch, and it's smaller. Again, probably, a financial risk yet again, but we're doing the stuff that I want to do, and they're making the games. And I played Trover all the way through and collected all the Power Babies like an insane person. And I was like, man, I have to see if I can work here. So I applied, got the job as an EP, and moved to California. So I moved to LA. We closed on our house in Boulder on Valentine's Day. So I was here right at the beginning of the pandemic. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
So bought a new house, moved in. I was at the Burbank studio for a week before we decided to work from home.
Yeah.
So it's it's been interesting working, meeting and getting to know the entire team remotely like this. And over the last year, we've I've gelled. I've got to work back in games again, which has been great. And then Tanya was talking to me about how she wanted to leave and move on and do other things. She kind of felt like she was a good startup CEO and wanted to get the studio started and really loved Justin and loved the team. And she's still invested in the studio, but she wanted to move on and do other things. at that point, I was asked if I wanted to take over as studio director and COO. And after some soul searching, I kind of figured out that it was less about wanting to work on games again and more wanting to have those kind of personal connections with the team is what I was craving before. It was like I would pass people in the hall at EA and I wouldn't know who they were.
Sure.
Or, I go to a meeting and I know half the people in the room and they would have to explain who they are to me. And I didn't want that. Like it's horrible. And the day-to-day was just not as fun as it used to be. Once I figured that out, I was like, well, I've established all those relationships and I'm really close. It's a smaller studio. We're just under 50 people and I know everybody and we've gotten to know each other really well over the pandemic. I said, well, I've got that and I do like telling people what to do and I have for 20 some years. So let's go ahead and move over to that studio director role. So very long story to get to the end of how I met back up with Tanya, but that's kind of where I landed right now.
We've had other people with like a producer background on the podcast that sort of expressed something similar, that they were like, well, I'm kind of just like, I'm good at telling people what to do. And so
yeah, it's a skill. Yeah. It's a skill, like, and it's a skill that you have to develop because it can go wrong bad quickly. Like I found actually personally, and this is off topic a little bit, but I found females are actually way better at being producers than males are. The way that they ask people to do things, kind of collaborate on deadlines, always seems to work better coming from females than males. And I've kind of taken from producers that I've worked with techniques on how to tell people what to do with that in mind. Like it's the way that it's delivered is different, and it's hard to really put your finger on. But
I like that take.
Yeah, I don't know why they seem to ask while still establishing deadlines, while still establishing that they're in charge. It's how my wife tells me to do stuff. I think I'm bordering on misogyny here, but like how they're able to ask us to do things we don't necessarily want to do, but feel compelled to do it because they asked. And like that particular skill set is something that I've tried to imitate for a while now.
No, but I mean, in any role, being able to look at what other people are doing and go, they're asking the same questions I am. They're asking people to do the same things I am, but they're doing it in a different way and it works better.
Right, exactly. And and the takeaway there was like, okay, what can I steal that I could use and be a better person that tells people what to do.
Good on you. Right, guys, I'm gonna be that guy who changes the subject in a very clumsy way.
Non sequitur to the next topic.
Do you want me to help you with your transition, Luke?
No, you just made it.
Okay, come up with your own smooth transition. Okay.
So you love WoW and D&D, right? It's mad how many people we have on the show, and D&D is such a core part of their life. Regardless of age, stage, sex, like it's still there. Like it's like pen and paper. I love that. Yeah, this is the thing. Like I was even daydreaming earlier. I daydream so much about what I'm going to roll. What I'm going to create next. Do you have a favorite moment D&D?
I mean, there's so many. Like there's one that's super memorable to me because it's really personal because it involves my brother. But like I've been playing D&D since first edition, like brown paper. I'm old as hell, so like I've been playing since they first came out. And I used to DM. I've always DM'd for some reason. Nobody else wants to do it, so I always DM'd. And I think we were playing second edition, but it was a bunch of guys in my neighborhood when I was growing up. I was probably like 11 or 12. And it's a bunch of guys that I got into playing D&D, and we had played in like a year-long campaign. It was almost 2 years by the time we got to the end of it. And my brother was playing with us as well. And my brother he's 3 years younger than most of us, and he's a great adult now, a great father, but he was an asshole when he was a little kid. He was very much, he played a first edition monk. So anybody that's played first edition, goes, first edition monks were badasses, right? They were way overpowered. Like nobody had done a good balancing pass on them. They were just, he could literally bully the rest of the party into doing stuff because he could just beat them up. And he took full advantage of that. Like he completely lived his little power struggle of life in this game. And he was just like, he particularly just abused this one guy in the group over and over again for almost 2 years. So we were getting to the end of the campaign, and I told everybody, like, hey, I'm going to wrap it up. This is going to be our last week of playing, and this, we're going to end the campaign, and we're going to start new characters. And I think it may have been when second edition was coming out. That's why we were starting new characters. And this guy that was a paladin in the group, he was quiet almost the entire year and a half. He barely said like 3 sentences the entire play session. And this is the guy that my brother picked on the most. He had evidently hatched this entire plan to get back at my brother on the last day. So he had,
oh Lord, I love the long con.
It was like a 2-year long con where he killed him, and then he posed him, like whole personed him, killed him, put him in a stupid kung fu pose, shrunk him, and then polymorphed him into stone so he could take him home and put him on his mantle.
Oh my God.
And, like, he was the nicest guy. He was like a paladin, and he played a paladin like for 2 years. He was like this nicest, sweet, quiet guy that I met in church, I think. And like he came this long, and we all just sat there with our mouths open after, like, because like he had planned it all out. There was like nothing my brother could do about it. And of course, like I wanted to get my brother a little bit, so I probably would have allowed it. And it was great. My brother will hate if he hears this story told again, but it was hilarious, and it stuck with me for 30 years. That story has stuck with me because it was the first time I saw that kind of behavior out of people. And really that's what, pen and paper games are, is like, it's mostly how we interact and how we problem solve and how we get along with each other. And it doesn't really matter that it's about swords and sorcery for a lot of it. And to see that kind of massive swing in behavior, it just
that's amazing.
I was just like, this is great. I'm going to remember this forever.
Well, Mike's brother, if you're listening, don't be a D&D bully. And then,
sorry, Chris. He's a nice person now.
I'm sure he is.
I'm not surprised. He's been shrunk and put on someone's mantelpiece.
Yeah, I know. How could you not make a change in lifestyle like that?
I love that. Did he have to roll anything, or was he just...
Oh, yeah. He rolled. He socked away like blessing potions and stuff to boost his rolls. He had planned it way out. Like, it was hard for him to fail with this amount of planning, because he had stockpiled all this stuff to work against Chris. I probably would have fudged a roll, honestly, if he hadn't have made it. Like, I probably would have let him do it because it was the end of the camp.
Yeah. My mate played as a wizard once, and we were trying to open this door, and obviously, like, wizards, they have very little strength generally, and he said he was going to try and force it open, and the DM let him, and he rolled a 1, so he broke his hands. Like, he couldn't cast for the rest of the campaign.
Oh God.
Oh dear, but I love it. I love D&D stories. They're so good because they're such little, almost their own like ecosystem stories away from life, but they represent everything in life, like you said, cooperation, working together, a bit of luck, persistence.
I love introducing people to D&D too. Like, I love introducing people, first-time players, to pen and paper. Everywhere I've gone, if I always try to get a group of designers together that haven't played pen and paper and play pen and paper with them, just to like go, hey, this is where system design started. Like, all the stuff that came after were basically nerds like me going, man, I wish I didn't have to like write all this down and roll these dice. I wish there was something that could do all this for me and look cool, like, so I wouldn't have to just imagine it all. Like, most of RPGs, like I remember playing the old TSR stuff on Commodore 64, like Seeker of the Silver Blades and Pool of Radiance, thing like that. It was D&D rules built into a video game for the first time. And then EverQuest came out. I was like, holy cow, I can go play this stuff without having to get 6 people together to go play it in my kitchen. And introducing like designers now to that roots, you can always see like the light bulbs come on. And it's fun to see. It's also fun to see like people not knowing how to react to basically a very open rule set. It's like, what do you want to do is the hardest question to answer if you've never played a pen and paper game. It's like, okay, this is what's going on. What do you guys do? What do you mean?
Yeah.
What are my constraints? I don't know. Your constraints are limited to what you can think of that your guy's going to do that you can pull off. Like, oh, wow, I didn't know that it was that open. Yes, that's what pen and paper used to be and what it still is.
Yeah, that's the allure of it, right? Like, it's mad. Like, we create these incredible worlds. I think about like The Witcher, Zelda, like big RPGs or D&D RPGs like Baldur's Gate, like 1 and 2, like Planescape Torment. But you do always end up back at D&D. I think like the 5th edition's really helped with this as well, just because of the scale of choice.
Yeah.
And how the level of the complexity ceiling is so high, yet now the entry level is very accessible now compared to what it was.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, God, I could talk about this all day. All right, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna do another fantastic transition.
Yeah, get me off pen and paper. I'll talk about Cthulhu next, and I'll never stop.
So let's go to like Squanch, right? Where you are now. You can see Justin Roiland's influence like throughout everything. Mm-hmm. And just for people who are listening, Justin Roiland is the co-creator of Rick and Morty. What's it like working with him?
It's great. Like I know it's kind of a pat answer to say it's great, but it's funny. I was just talking about it with our directors the other day. Justin is one of those rare people that I've seen in game development that I've only seen him one other time, and it was with Todd Howard back in Elder Scrolls days. And he's the person that has the game fully realized in their head already. And anything that they see during the development process that doesn't sync with that, they can call it out in a way that's specific enough that the team understands where it's going. And that doesn't seem like it should be that unique of a skill, but it really is. Like people like lead designers and creative directors and your line designers, they all have an idea of where they want to go with systems or features or story or narrative. And once they get there, they understand it, but they don't have the whole thing mapped out. And Justin seems to have this and 3 other games already mapped out in his head. My biggest nightmare was, I love the guy, I love his work. I'm going to come here and he's not going to know how to make video games, and it's going to be a nightmare. And he's going to want to do crazy stuff, but maybe somebody put in the work before I got here to teach him, or he learned on his own. I assume that he learned a lot of it is on his own because he's brilliant, but he understands scope. He understands the cost of pivots. He understands feature creep. He understands like all the stuff that producers kind of ping on for creative types. And he learned how to work his creative vision inside of constraints that are realistic to making video games. Like the only thing he has left to learn is that we can't do them in 2 days, that it takes longer than 2 days to do everything. But like other than that, like Justin is incredible to work with. He's as funny as you think he is all the time. Like that's just Justin. Like Morty is Justin when he's excited. When Justin's excited, that is Morty's voice. Like he does it. All of our Trover is Justin excited. He gets the same level of excitement in pitch meetings and design discussions and reviews of levels and stuff like that. He's just super bought in, super creative and high energy. And he brings it to the team. Like team meetings that he comes to and has anything to say, it's just infectious. Like his energy and like creativity are infectious to the team. And it really helps bolster it up, especially during these times where we're all like in our own little bubbles, and it's easy to kind of lose motivation and lose that creative juice. But then Justin will jump on and I can't talk about some of the stuff that Justin says, but it's usually pretty foul, but funny as hell.
Enthusiasm is one of my favorite traits in a person, but enthusiasm mixed with a bit of adult language and foul concepts, I guess we should say, even better.
Yeah, that's Justin. And it permeates the team too. It's a lot of the folks at Squanch are just like Justin. So, and if they're not, they usually don't work out. If you don't appreciate that level of enthusiasm and adult humor, you're probably not going to work out, because we're small, we're scrappy. We don't have like a huge bench. You have to check in and show up to play every day. And because we don't have anybody that can hide behind like, oh, I'm one of 10 environment artists. It's like, no, you're like, you have to do your job every day and be enthusiastic about it, or it just doesn't work out. So it's a cool feeling when everybody on the team is just as excited to work on the games that you're working on as you are. And that's what Justin kind of brings, that excitement.
That's really good. I think that must be such a fun atmosphere as well. I love the idea of humor being at the center of everything you guys do.
Yeah, and it's the first studio that I've worked at that actually backs up that creative first thing. Like most studios will say it, we're a creative first studio, and I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, oh, but here it really is creative first. We'll throw a day's worth of VO recording away if a joke doesn't land. Justin will rewrite things in the booth, and we'll extend deadlines. We'll do whatever it takes to, and work longer hours and do whatever it takes to make sure that like what we're putting out there is what we're happy with, not just like what meets a milestone or what meets a deadline. It's like, okay, this is funny, which is, kind of hard to do in the games industry. And it's why so few people do it is kind of getting that humor to land.
Yeah, but on the subject of humor, it is the center of what you guys do, but the video game industry, humor is lacking in so much. Things like The Witcher have moments of like being hilarious, but actually as a emotion stirring, like sitting there genuinely laughing, those moments normally actually come from sandbox adventures and creating them with your friends.
Right.
However, games created for younger audiences are actually quite funny. You see kids playing games and actually cracking up, and it's weird that devs can actually do that. Why do you think it's such a challenge for games for older audiences?
I think it's intention more than anything. I think that the jokes or the humor that comes out of games for adults is accidental, and it's usually slipped in by designers or writers that weren't actually, like they're not tasked to come up with humor for the game. They just inject some of their own humor, and some of them are funny. So you get moments of comedy in some games like The Witcher, but you have to be, for adult comedy or for a comedy targeted to an adult audience, you have to be very persistent about it. Like you can't just do a lackadaisical version of it. You have to hire comedy writers. You have to work with folks that are skilled at writing comedy, and they don't necessarily even have to work in games. Like we've hired writers from Eric Andre's show and Rick and Morty, and they're folks that are not traditional writers or designers for video games, but they know how to write a good joke and how that's structured, and they know how to write a good character background for a character that will be funny in a certain way, and they know what feels hacky and what doesn't. And I think, the industry, when I started at Bethesda, we had a no joke rule. It was like, don't try to be funny because you're probably not funny. Yeah.
Well, I know when I'm helping people get ready for a presentation, my advice is either if you want to be funny, do the funny thing people want to laugh. But if you're not sure if it's funny, don't do it at all.
Yeah. That's I think the governing rule for most game makers is we're not sure if it's funny, so don't try to do it because they're super risk averse to doing anything that'll make their game feel cringy or out of touch or all these guys are ridiculous. Like they're afraid to do that. And Justin and the Squanch team are not afraid at all. Like they're fearless about humor, and they're fearless. Like Justin is, if you follow him on Instagram or you follow him on any social media, he's a crazy person. He's pushing boundaries all the time about comedy, about what's acceptable in society, and pushing back on different things that he doesn't find good about where culture is going. And at the same time, he is able to find the thing that most people are going to find funny. So he's not like a fringe comedian. He's also kind of a common man comedian where we understand where culture's at and what's funny and what's not. And without that as your North Star, as your tastemaker basically for the studio and for the game, it's a struggle to make a horror game or a fantasy RPG or a shooter or whatever it is have any real chance at being genuinely funny, because it's not designed to be funny. Mm-hmm. It's designed to be high adrenaline. It's designed to be exploration. It's not meant to be an experience that you laugh through. We have the same basic structure as RPGs in a lot of ways, where we set up quests. They might be missions and whatever we're going to be working on, and they have objectives and they have NPCs you're going to talk to, and you progress through the game and have persistent achievement. And it's like making video games one-on-one. And the difference is our NPCs are built around the concept of how are we going to make this funny? how is this person going to come back later and play into the larger joke? How is this scene going to set up in a way that the player's going to find hilarious and also entertaining? Not just like cheap fart jokes everywhere, but also in a way that pushes the story forward. That is we start with the A script, the A story for all of our levels. Like, how does the A story for this level play in to how it's constructed and what NPCs are going to be there, and like how this area is going to be, these are the slums and this is what's going to happen here. And like, it's all built around story. And a lot of games are built the other way around, where they build a level, they build an area, they build an experience, and then try to lay narrative on top of it or try to lay humor on top of it. And it wasn't actually custom built to make the joke land.
So here's what I wonder. Like, one thing I tell my kids all the time is that you can feel two feelings at the same time, but sometimes they're opposite feelings and they're both full feelings. One doesn't cancel out the other. Like, you can feel lonely and loved at the same time. You can feel sad and also relieved at the same time. Maybe we haven't quite got there with games yet, where you can create a game that evokes two feelings at once, right? Like a game that is funny, but also emotionally resonant, or like funny, but also, like you said, the adrenaline. Like, maybe we haven't quite got there yet, where you can evoke two feelings at once.
I think it has a lot to do with just the medium itself. You're presented with like such a tough problem to solve. It's like, how's the player experience going to be both unique and the same for every player? That's why in games we take like the broadest brush approach most of the time, where it's like, we're going to try to be as appealing to our core audience and our demographic, and design the game around that, because it's going to be our biggest chance to be enjoyed by the most people. And it's, some people may not like to be scared and laugh at the same time. So let's not mix these. And, some people may love it, and some people just don't play horror games. Some people don't play sports games. But if you played a horror sports game, then it's going to be like even smaller of an audience. So it gets tougher, like, to mix that with thoughts of audience size and like keeping a job.
But I think with games, I think you're right, because it's such a big development team. Even when you bring in writers, unless it's specifically to create humor and comedy, that is the challenge, is that there is the focal point. And I think the other thing is characterization. I think so few games are good at characterization to the level you need to be genuinely funny.
Right.
Through animation and things like this, and just,
Totally. And you're absolutely right. And that's something that I probably should have mentioned too. It really is around building those characters that resonate with you, and resonate with the player. And when it's not just the words that come out of their mouth, it's like how they interact with other people and like why they say what they say. And it's a skill. And everybody thinks it's what you're saying. Like, I thought I was funny until I started working here, and I am not funny. It turns out, like, the comedy writers and Justin just are way funnier than me. And it's like super, super awkward to realize how far off I was. And
it just makes you feel bad.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, like I'm almost 50 years old and I thought I was funny this whole time. But
when we started this podcast, someone was like, it told me, but they were like, I was like, well, it's going to be kind of funny. Like, we're going to tell the stories, but like, we'll banter with the guests too. And they were like, but you're not funny. I was like, I'm hilarious. I don't think you get it.
I'm funny. Yeah. That kind of like underlying skill set. It's one of those things where like everybody thinks they can do, but they can't actually do it well. And it's like, whether that's being like, designers are one of the one positions that I've noticed in my career that are applied by the most underqualified people in the industry, because everybody thinks they can design a video game because they have one idea for one feature or one game, and they're like, I just want to make this, it's going to be so great. And you're like, hey, that's a good idea. Now do that 10 more times before the end of the week. And they're like, oh wait, it took me 20 years to come up with this one idea. You're like, well, yeah, that's because it's a skill and it's a talent, and it's something that you have to develop and work on. Like comedy writing and writing narrative, writing just dialogue is a skill. Like, writing dialogue to be recorded by actors is a tremendous skill. And it doesn't, like, and if you don't know how to do it, you can't even really look at the written word and decide whether or not it's good, because you don't know how to write it. Like I would review writer samples for when we're hiring writers, and I look at him like, this guy doesn't seem that funny. But Justin would look at him and go, this guy's hilarious. Bring him in. Let's do another test with him. And he'd come in. I'm like, oh right, yeah, Justin was right. Like I read the original Pirates of the Caribbean script when I was at Bethesda. I read through all the dialogue. I was like, this is a horrible movie. Like nobody's going to watch this. But I don't have the skill to like take the written word in multimedia and determine whether or not it's good. And people have that skill, but everybody thinks they can do it.
It's like when I first heard about Twitter, and I was like, no one's going to do this.
No, yeah, I mean, if anybody would follow my advice on some of the stuff, they would be bankrupt by now. But
I wish I'd invested in GME stocks. I wish I'd followed people's advice. I was on Reddit when everyone was talking about that.
Invest and immediately sell.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, like, honestly. But
the thing is, though, making life decisions based on Reddit advice is a whole different problem.
But you say that, yeah, but I thought about doing this thing, right? So whenever I have an argument with my girlfriend, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to post it from a completely objective point of view.
Okay.
And just my response will be based on the most upvoted response.
I think it depends on the community, right? There are some Reddit communities that are wonderful and supportive and kind and like the most wholesome place on the internet. And then there are some that are terrifying.
But that's what's so good. You just go with the common census. So they might be like, look, you should like leave your girlfriend and take the floorboards with you because you spent all the time putting them down. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Like everyone's
Is this an actual fight?
No, it might be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, someday.
Maybe it's a premonition. Yeah,
crowdsourcing life decisions sounds like a horrible idea.
Maybe that's a good app idea.
Dude,
instead of like Reddit, just like an app just to crowdsource life decisions.
Honestly, like,
should I get pickles or not?
Yeah, do I need another guinea pig?
Yeah. Can you imagine if people just made that decision?
That's kind of what Yahoo Answers is, though.
Is Yahoo Answers like crowdsourced?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also like 35 years old and no one uses it. So maybe we need to revive that.
You have to go to Ask Jeeves to find it.
This is it.
This next question is my favorite because it's basically you giving us like a game pitch for a game that you don't have the license to.
Yeah, so I'm going to do it. So have you seen The Office? Have you watched it?
Yes, I don't live under a rock.
So I'm watching it for the first time.
Really? So you lived under a rock until recently?
But I watched the UK one like a long time ago, the Ricky Gervais But I didn't watch the US one because
it's inferior. It's not the British one. So you don't want to watch the inferior American version.
I think I prefer it.
Yeah, it is better. I was just I'm just assuming you were going there because
no. Like, I think I didn't like the first season as much because I found Michael Scott too forced, but actually by the second season I like started having like empathy as well as like complete hatred for him in the space of about 6 minutes.
If we're ever gonna get like torn apart in our mentions after an episode, it's British Office versus US Office. It's gonna be
I think we should just enjoy them both.
They're both good.
All right, fine. That's a very Switzerland take on this.
They're both good.
Do you think is possible? Do you think if someone made a game where you were an employee
right
at Dunder Mifflin, is this something that you think would be a good idea? Like, imagine you've got a VR headset on, right?
Okay.
You're at Dunder Mifflin, you come in, greeted by Pam, you've got Dwight and Jim there, you've got to go down, you've just got to do like menial tasks. Obviously, it's a paper supplier, distributor, it's not even a paper factory, but you're there and Michael Scott's your boss and you essentially have to survive a day and it's an episodic series of games. What do you think?
I mean, it's horrible. I think it's probably would never work in VR.
You were such a sweetheart for even taking that question seriously.
It's boring. Like I don't know who it's for. No, sorry. I mean, like it's something that we're really interested here at Squanch is like different ideas in VR and what makes sense there and what doesn't. And it's such a small market now, so it's still, you can still get away with doing experimental stuff like recreating an office in VR, and like it smells a little bit like game dev studio or story, but in VR. And I think the key thing would be your like it's your narrative at that point. It was what we're talking about, whether or not jokes would land, because like if you just pitch The Office without ever seeing The Office, you'd be like, okay, I'm a salesman at a paper company that has an attached warehouse that 24 people work at, and they interact in weird ways. Be like, oh, that's hard. Like it would be my Pirates of the Caribbean. I'd be like, oh, that's stupid. Nobody's going to watch that. And, you know, but it all depends if you got really good writers for it, and you had really good joke writers, and the experience was moving through a virtual office space, whether it was Dunder Mifflin or anything, and all the characters were interesting, and the way they interacted with the player was interesting, and it was funny, then yeah, I think it could work. Episodic, I'm a little weird on. I prefer to release entire games and then augment it. So where it's more like, here's the entire A story, and then DLC or add-ons or another chapter is a good thing. But people are looking at that stuff right now too. Like there's mobile companies that do it. There's, you know, Telltale tried to do it for a while. There's fail cases and success cases out there, but who knows? Like, you know, if you get the right writers, it would probably be pretty okay.
I think you guys should do it.
No.
Please.
No.
Please. I just mean.
No, we develop our own IP. See, we immediately would have to pay like Mindy Kaling or something a bunch of money for that. Like, there's no way like we're gonna like use somebody else's IP. Like, if we're gonna do anything, it would be Rick and Morty. Like, that would be the one to rip off. But it
could be a crossover though. You know, you get like Marvel versus Capcom.
Oh my gosh,
Can
Luke,
you imagine
I have never
like, The
been
Office
more
versus Rick and
tempted.
Morty?
I've never been more tempted to take out one of your questions because, like I said, this is just you giving us a game pitch for a game you don't have the license to.
I'm just saying. Like,
Okay.
I mean, like,
Okay.
It's a good idea.
Okay.
yeah, it's good on you, man. Like, you took your swing.
You can't blame me for trying. I think whenever am I going to get this opportunity again?
Yeah.
You know, you're
Probably not
definitely
after
going
that
to block
pitch,
me.
This is the end of all of us.
Okay.
This episode is like just the end of all of our
Do
careers.
you know what it is? It's just literally chaos. I like
Okay,
that. I kind
I'm
of
getting
enjoy
this back
it.
on track. We're back on track.
Okay.
So, Mike, you get a choice of one of two questions for your final question because we're getting a little low on time. So you can either give us look in your crystal ball and tell us where you hope to see the games industry in 5 years, or you can kind of give us this top-down perspective. Like, you've been in the industry for such a long time. What is it that keeps you here? What keeps you making games?
I think there's probably a way to answer both of those at the same time a little bit. So it's what keeps me going, and where I think the industry is going is that every day is a little bit different than the previous day, and we're only limited by our imagination. Like, the technology is crazy now, and it's only getting better. And like, other industries are more and more looking at gamification, and game design philosophies are kind of like everywhere in the world now. Like, your points on your CVS card is gamification. Like, your frequent flyer miles is gamification of flying with an airline. Like, kind of the public's acceptance of games and that way of doing things is huge, and technology is rapidly moving forward. So like, for me, every day coming in is like another opportunity to either witness or participate in something that may be the next cool thing that everybody likes. Because, that's where I started, was being a DM in my kitchen when I was a kid, trying to come up with something that my 6 friends would find fun, that they would have a good time with. And I put in all the extra work to make sure that they would enjoy what they were playing. And at the end of the day, I felt I succeeded when they had fun. And for us, it's like that every day. It's like, how do we make the next thing that's going to be, the people are going to enjoy, they're going to find fun, hopefully, lets us keep buying sodas and keeps us employed. But that's not really you don't get into games to make money, really. You get into games for that satisfaction of creating something that people are going to enjoy. So where the industry will go will be to continue to explore that. Like, I think that VR and AR is untapped. I don't have as much confidence in it as Justin does. Justin is a huge VR person. He really loves VR. I think that it'll be interesting to see what Sony does with its next rev of VR. If they go with a tetherless VR headset like Quest with kind of Sony's game making background, it could become the next cell phone, where it is something that becomes a piece of hardware that is required for daily life, and you buy them every year or two like you would buy a cell phone, and with the next level improvement, and it becomes part of your life. Or it could go the way of Google Glass and fail completely and go away, and we're just back to flat screen gaming. But I think that this industry, more than any, are interested in pushing those boundaries and seeing if that stuff works. Like playing games on your phone wasn't a thing 10 years ago. Any VR games, much less multiple VR games on multiple hardware, wasn't a thing years ago. So like we're always going to be pushing the next cool thing. It's whether that is, the return of the Power Glove, where it's all manipulated through your fingers, like whatever. Like we're going to be pushing that next thing. I think the only industry that's more innovative on entertaining people is probably the porn industry, but we're right there. Like games, like porn like pushes the envelope. Like they were in VR before us. They're probably the reason that the internet was created was for porn, but games is right there. Like we're like right on their coattails.
Somehow porn hasn't come up on the podcast yet.
Really?
Wow.
Not even once. Not
weird.
even once. So you get that honor, sir.
Sweet.
That was so good. It was so good. It's such a great, all we are is imitators of, a far greater industry than ours.
Yeah, we're riding that coattails.
That is great. On that note, absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for being our guest. Okay.
It was good fun.
It was good fun.
All right. That was Mike Fridley. Great guest.
What was your favorite bit?
What was my favorite bit? I thought it was kind of cool that we have a shared history, that he started in QA and his whole path of how, we say this all the time, no two people have the same path within this industry because it just in some ways is still so young. And so getting to highlight what his path has been and how that background in QA led to where he is, and but there's a million different roads to get to where he is. So I thought that was fascinating. Plus he was just hilarious.
It is weird that everyone's, well, not everyone, but so many of our guests have this D&D link as well.
As always, all of the thoughts, feelings, and ideas expressed here today are our own. They belong to whoever said them, not to the organizations that person may or may not work for. GG, my friend. GG.
Game over.